For 3 years I was the perfect fool. I woke before dawn to make breakfast, scrubbed floors late into the night, handed over every paycheck, and let my in-laws drain the $14,000 my parents had scraped together for my dowry. I believed that if I just kept swallowing my pride, one day they would finally treat me like family. Then came the afternoon I coughed blood onto the bedroom floor and they threw me out, stealing the last tiny deed I had to my name. The last thing I heard was my husband Derek telling his girlfriend on the phone that Hag dying is the best thing that could happen. We won't have to waste money on hospital bills. The day I walked into the divorce office at the courthouse, my mother-in-law stood with her hands on her hips screaming that I was an ungrateful leech. My husband hid behind her pretending to be helpless. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole Shaw clan, surrounded me, piling on guilt, demanding I leave with nothing. They thought I would cry and back down, the way I always had. I tore the settlement papers in half. I pulled out every bank statement, every hotel receipt, every screenshot of his affairs, and in front of a room full of strangers I told them. Every cent comes back to me. Every stick of furniture I brought into that house leaves with me. Try to stop me and I will call the police, I will sue, I will freeze every account you have and make sure the whole town knows exactly what kind of people you are. This isn't a fairy tale. It's the story of a woman who finally learned to bare her teeth. The fluorescent lights in the county clerk's office buzzed overhead, mixing the smell of stale cigarette smoke with cheap floor cleaner. My fingers were clamped around a draft of the divorce decree so tightly that my nails left half-moon dents in my palm. The sting kept my pounding head tethered to the present. I hadn't slept the night before. 3 years of marriage had unspooled behind my eyelids in an endless loop, and by the time the sun came up only one thought remained, cold and clear as ice. No more. Quit dragging your feet and sign the damn paper. Patricia Shaw planted herself in front of me, arms akimbo, close enough that I could smell the spearmint gum on her breath. She had on a scarlet flowered blouse that screamed for attention in a sea of gray-faced clerks and weary couples. Her voice carried to every corner of the hall. 3 years you ate our food, lived under our roof. Divorce means you walk away with nothing. Make it quick so my son can find a real wife. I stared at her flushed, eager face and a reel of images clicked past, tiptoeing into the kitchen at 5 in the morning to make her millet porridge, only to be told it was too watery. Scrubbing the grout between the kitchen tiles on my hands and knees while she pointed out a spot I'd missed. Standing in front of her every payday with my palm open, handing over the cash while she plucked it away without a single word of thanks. Did you hear me? Patricia reached for the pen in my hand. I stepped back, just out of her range, and let my gaze drift past her to the man hovering at her shoulder. Derek kept his eyes fixed somewhere near the floor, his fingers picking at the edge of the paperwork. Elena, just listen to my mom. Don't make a scene. We're ending this, can't we at least do it with some dignity? His voice was that same soft, reasonable murmur he used when he wanted people to think he was the long-suffering peacemaker. If I hadn't had the files on my phone, I might almost have believed him. Dignity. I said the word quietly, but each syllable landed like a stone. Hearing that word come out of your mouth makes me want to vomit. His head jerked up. A flicker of genuine alarm passed through his eyes. He had never heard me use that tone. For 3 years he had grown comfortable with a wife who swallowed every insult, who never talked back when his mother pointed at her face and called her worthless. His older sister Megan folded her arms and let out a theatrical laugh. Oh, look who finally grew a backbone. A woman who can't even produce a child, who else would take you? Sign the papers and stop wasting my brother's time. A chorus of agreement rippled through the cluster of relatives behind her. 3 years and not even a pregnancy. And she still thinks she deserves a payout. The 𝐒𝐄𝐒𝐑𝐈𝐏𝐲 fed you for 3 years. You ought to be paying us. Sign it already. The longer this drags out, the worse it looks for everyone. 6 or 7 of them pressed into a half circle, penning me against the intake window. Their voices overlapped and swelled, a human wave meant to drown me. Once, it would have worked. I used to be terrified of being the subject of gossip, of neighbors whispering behind their hands, of my own parents wringing their hands over what the relatives would say. So every single time, I had caved. I had given away my salary, my dowry, my pride, and in the end, even the tiny studio apartment my parents had bought me. Until I lay on a cold floor coughing up blood and heard my husband's voice through the phone receiver, casual and relieved, that Hag dying is the best thing that could happen, we won't have to waste money on hospital bills. That sentence cut through every illusion I had left. Some people don't respond to kindness. With people like the 𝐒𝐄𝐒𝐑𝐈𝐏𝐲s, softness is a death sentence. The only way to survive is to show them your claws and refuse to retract them. I didn't retreat. I moved sideways, into the dead center of the lobby, where everyone could see me. I ate your food. I lived under your roof. My voice rose, pitched to Carrie. Let's settle every account right here, in front of all these witnesses. I pulled a folder from my bag and began laying out papers on the intake counter, one by one. The down payment on the house was $25,000. I put in $8,400. The renovation cost over $15,000. I paid more than $11,000. Here are the bank records, every transfer highlighted. The first file hit the counter with a crisp snap. For 3 years my monthly paycheck of $700 went straight into the family account. Every deposit is time-stamped. Total, more than $25,000. The destination of every withdrawal is flagged for 𝐒𝐄 household expenses. The second file landed. The $14,000 my parents gave as a wedding gift was supposed to be joint property. 2 days after the ceremony, Patricia withdrew the entire sum and used it as a down payment on Ryan's new car. Here is the withdrawal slip and the purchase contract, dated 3 days apart. The third file dropped, and for the first time in 3 years, I watched the color drain from Patricia 𝐒𝐄's face. You're lying. Her voice pitched into a shriek. She lunged for the papers. This is all forged. I sidestepped her grasping hands, caught her wrist, and pushed it firmly away. She stumbled backward, colliding with Megan before catching her balance. For a beat she gaped at me, then her mouth opened to release the familiar, gale-force wail of a woman who has made a career out of public scenes. She hit me. You all saw it. Did I? I held up my phone, the camera recording light blinking red. I've been filming this entire conversation. Go ahead, throw yourself on the floor. The second you do, I'll post this video to the neighborhood Facebook group and let the entire block watch you try to stage an injury for sympathy. Patricia's scream jammed in her throat. Her face shaded to a furious purple. Derek stepped forward, his own complexion gone gray. That's enough. Stop making a spectacle of yourself. You're the spectacle. I cut him off and swiped open a different folder on my phone, shoving the screen so close to his nose he flinched. Screenshots, a Valentine's Day transfer of $75 to an account labeled Baby Girl. A weekend hotel booking. A recurring monthly payment of $420 to a contact whose profile photo was a woman blowing a kiss. The screen blazed. Derek's face turned the color of old milk. Last Valentine's Day you told me you had to work late. Now I see you were working late, at the Holiday Inn. I spun the phone toward the crowd. You cheated on me. You spent my money on other women. You let your mother bleed me dry. And you have the nerve to stand here and talk about dignity. A stunned silence swallowed the hall for one heartbeat, then erupted into chaos. People who had been waiting for their own appointments now had their phones out. An older woman in a green cardigan said loudly, "What a piece of trash." Using his wife's money to fund his side piece and then trying to leave her with nothing. Despicable. Call the police, honey. Press charges. Derek looked like a man whose skeleton had been yanked out through his shoes. He stood there, mouth working, nothing coming out. Patricia whirled, trying to block the phone cameras, her arms flapping. "Stop filming. This is a private family matter." "Private?" I pocketed my phone. "For 3 years you treated me like an ATM and an unpaid maid. Now that I'm adding up the bill, suddenly it's private." I turned to the clerk behind the counter, a tired-looking woman in her 50s who had been watching the entire scene with undisguised contempt. "Please redraft the agreement. $14,000 dowry returned in full. Half of the $11,000 in joint savings. And every single item I brought into the marriage leaves with me. If any of that is missing from this document, I'm not signing today." The clerk studied me for a moment, then nodded. "It's only fair. I'll reprint it now." "Absolutely not." Patricia's voice cracked. "That savings is my son's hard-earned money. Your son earns $600 a month. He couldn't save $11,000 in 3 years if he didn't eat." I didn't bother to turn around. "The account is mostly my salary. Under the law, that's marital property. Not Shaw family property." Megan thrust herself forward. "Those quilts and furniture are 3 years old. They're worthless. You'd really humiliate yourself fighting over used goods. If they're worthless, why are you so determined to keep them?" I met her eyes. "Could it be because you paid a psychic to read the fortune on my silk wedding quilt and she told you it would bring luck to your brother's next bride?" Megan's face flamed. Having that piece of private greed exposed in public was a humiliation she had not prepared for. Patricia stood clenching her fists, exchanging a wild-eyed look with Derek. They had not expected resistance. They had certainly not expected evidence. The crowd pressed closer, voices rising, and the weight of public disgust bore down on the Shaws like a physical force. Derek's forehead glistened. He tugged at his mother's sleeve and muttered, "Mom, just sign. People are watching." "Shut up." She shook him off. But when she scanned the room she found only scorn, smirks, and phones raised to record. Not a single face offered sympathy. Off to the side, leaning against the wall near the records window, a man in a charcoal jacket stood watching. Unlike the rest of the gawkers, he hadn't pulled out a phone. He simply waited, a folder tucked under one arm, his expression unreadable. He looked to be in his early 30s, clean-faced, with the kind of stillness that makes a person seem more substantial than the noise around him. Something about his face stirred a vague flutter of recognition in the back of my mind, but I couldn't place it. Not the time. "Redraft the papers," Patricia ground out, each word scraped across gravel. "Give her the money." The green certificate took only minutes. When the clerk handed me the final agreement, she gave me a small, knowing smile. "Good for you, honey." I read every line, signed my name, and set the pen down. My fingers trembled, not from fear but from the sheer, dizzying relief of breathing without a stone on my chest. For the first time in 3 years, the weight had been shifted by my own 2 hands. The divorce decree was only the first step. That afternoon, I went back to the Shaw house to pack up my belongings and found a human blockade at the entrance to the building. Patricia had rallied reinforcements, Aunt Lydia, and Esther, a couple of her cronies from the next building over. 6 or 7 women spread across the concrete steps like a wall of floral polyester. Derek lurked in the shadow of the stairwell, too cowardly to show his face but too greedy to let me go without a fight. Aunt Lydia, a woman built like a refrigerator, planted herself directly in front of the door. "You got your money back. The dowry goods stay. Those quilts and appliances have absorbed 3 years of Shaw family energy. If you take them, you take our luck with you." Aunt Esther chimed in, her voice already trembling with theatrical grief. "Elena, honey, when did you become so unreasonable? Being a wife means enduring some hardship. When I married into this family..." "When you married in, you got a $300 bride price and you're still complaining about it 40 years later." I cut her off. I knew every skeleton in this family's closet because I'd spent 3 years listening to them rattle. "You want me to air the rest of your business in front of the neighbors?" Aunt Esther's mouth opened and closed without producing any sound. Derek finally edged out of the stairwell, wearing the hangdog expression he always put on when he wanted to look like the victim. "Elena, this stuff isn't worth much. Why make it ugly? Just give my mom a little face and we can part peacefully." I didn't let him finish. "Not worth much. Then why block the door?" I pulled up another video on my phone. On the screen, Patricia sat at a mahjong table, crowing to her friends, "My daughter-in-law's silk wedding quilt is top quality. The fortune teller said it carries prosperity energy. We're saving it for the new bride." I had gotten the clip from one of her disgruntled card partners weeks ago, and it had been sitting in my arsenal ever since. Shall I keep going? Patricia's face cycled through several shades of red. You recorded me without my consent. You said it loud enough for the whole block to hear. Hardly a private confession. I slid the phone back into my pocket. Here's how this works. Either you step aside and let me pack in peace, or I forward this video to Derek's HR department. The head of personnel lives in the building behind this one, doesn't she? I'm sure she'd find it enlightening. Derek lunged forward as if he'd been jabbed with a cattle prod. Mom. Let her take it. Take everything. He knew that if proof of his affairs reached his company, the team lead position he'd spent 2 years angling for would evaporate overnight. The firm had just rolled out a new ethics policy, and moral turpitude was a one-strike offense. By now the stairwell had filled with neighbors. Mrs. Dorothy Bennett, a retired schoolteacher who lived on the top floor, stood on the landing with her arms folded, watching the spectacle. She caught my eye and jerked her chin upward. Go on up, dear. Nobody's going to stop you. We're all here. Anyone lays a hand on you, I'm calling the cops. Patricia trembled with fury, but even she wasn't stupid enough to pick a fight with Mrs. Bennett. The woman had taught half the neighborhood's children and wielded more social power than the mayor. I pushed through the crowd and climbed the stairs. The bedroom looked exactly as I had left it. On the nightstand sat our wedding photo. In it, I was smiling so hard my cheeks bunched up, as if sheer force of joy could will a good life into being. I picked up the frame, studied it for 3 slow seconds, then dropped it into the trash can. The glass shattered against the metal bottom, a clean, final sound, like a thread snapping. Everything I had spent 3 years protecting had been worthless from the start. I rolled the silk quilt, folded my off-season clothes into storage bins, swept the toiletries from the vanity into a makeup bag. Every single item was something I had bought before the wedding. The Shaws had never given me anything except demands and deceit. At the bottom of the wardrobe, my fingers brushed a thick manila envelope. Inside was a property deed in my name only, a cramped studio apartment in a less desirable part of town, paid for in full by my parents before I got married. They had called it my emergency exit, just in case. I didn't know then that it was the wisest investment they would ever make. This apartment, too, the Shaws had tried to steal. Patricia had crooned that family doesn't need to draw lines, and Derek had murmured that adding his name to the deed would show trust. I had signed. 2 months later the unit was transferred to Ryan's name. Just borrowing it for a while, they said. They never gave it back. But this time I had never agreed to any transfer, and the deed was still in my hands. I tucked the envelope into my jacket, zipped my duffel bag, and went downstairs. The blockade had thinned. Mrs. Bennet had organized an impromptu moving crew from the neighbors. They helped me load boxes into the rental van while Patricia watched from the curb, her lips pressed into a white line. Derek stood at the entrance, watching me carry out the last bag. His expression was a muddle of humiliation, resentment, and a bewilderment that struck me as almost genuine, as if it had never occurred to him that the woman who had spent 3 years bending over backward might one day break instead. "Elena." He spoke just as I was about to climb into the passenger seat. His voice was hoarse. "Is this really how it ends?" The driver, a young guy with a crew cut, slammed the cargo door shut and shot Derek a look of pure disdain. "Buddy, let the lady go. Maybe you should have thought about consequences before you started sleeping around." Derek's face contorted, but he had no words. I got into the van and watched the gray apartment block shrink in the side mirror. The building, the neighborhood, the endless clamor of mahjong tiles, none of it had ever been my home. It had just been a slow, grinding process of depletion. The van rolled out of the compound. Sunlight slanted through the sycamore leaves and fell across the dashboard in shifting patches. The driver switched on the radio and an old song crackled through the speakers. I rolled down the window and let the wind stream through my fingers. The sensation brought back a memory. For years earlier, before I had ever met Derek, I had been walking to my car when I saw a man slumped against the wall of a convenience store, gray-faced and drenched in sweat. I had bought him a soda and a sandwich, waited until he could stand, then left. He had said he would thank me properly someday. I never saw him again. The man in the charcoal jacket at the courthouse, that was him. Now I remembered. My phone buzzed. An unknown number. "What you did today was impressive. If you ever need help, you can find me here." Below was an address, a hardware store on the corner of Old Street, and a name. Lucas Grant. The Shaws did not give up their money easily. The divorce agreement stipulated that the $14,000 dowry must be returned within 3 days, and the division of savings within 7. By the afternoon of day 3, my bank account remained unchanged. Right on schedule, Derek's call came through. It was his signature maneuver: wait until the last possible hour and then deploy that syrupy, pleading voice that had always worked on me before. "Elena, things are really tight at home right now. My mom's medical bills, Ryan's car payments. Can you give us a year? I swear, I'll pay you back with interest." We were husband and wife. "You wouldn't leave me destitute, would you?" I had my phone wedged between my ear and shoulder while I chopped scallions on a cutting board. The tiny rental apartment was thick with the aroma of star anise, cinnamon, and soy sauce. A pot of brine bubbled on the stove. I was developing a braised food recipe, getting ready to start a stall at the night market. "Derek," I said, drying my hands on a dish towel and picking up the phone properly. My voice was as flat as lake water. "This morning at 10 o'clock, your mother bought 2 pounds of jumbo shrimp at the market. That's over $40. At 11, your brother filled his new car with a full tank of gas. And you're telling me you have no money?" Silence hummed on the line for 3 seconds. Then Derek cracked. His tone shot up an octave. The gentle mask shattered, exposing the jagged panic underneath. Are you having me followed? I don't need to follow anyone. I stirred the brine. The scent of cassia bark bloomed. Your mother was bragging to the fishmonger, loud enough for the entire street to hear, that her son was about to remarry a city girl. Did you really think that would stay a secret? Old Street was that kind of place. The market was the intelligence hub, the tea house was the rumor mill. Nobody's business stayed private for long. I'd been here less than a week, and already 5 different people had stopped by to update me on the latest Shaw family disaster. Derek's breathing turned ragged. The gentle husband persona was a cheap mask, and it shattered under even the slightest pressure. I'm telling you, he snarled, the money isn't there. If you take this to court, I'll have my mother park herself in front of your stall every single day. You'll never sell a thing. So you'd rather send your mother to harass me than repay what you owe? I set down the ladle. That falls under willful noncompliance plus harassment. Legally, that compounds the penalties. Are you sure that's the route you want to take? Don't lecture me about the law. Fine, no lecture. I switched the call to speaker and opened my filing app. I'll notify the court and request immediate enforcement. Your family's bank accounts will be frozen. Ryan's car will be impounded. And under the new regulations, if you're added to the defaulters list, you won't be able to fly or take the train. Any future children you might have, legitimate ones, I mean, will have their school enrollment affected. Think about that. You wouldn't dare. Patricia's shriek burst through the receiver. She had been listening the whole time, as always. Try me. 3 words, then I hung up and submitted the online filing. I had prepared the paperwork the day we signed the agreement. Chat logs, bank statements, the notarized settlement, time-stamped evidence of the missed deadline, every piece locked into place. When I clicked submit, I felt something loosen deep in my chest. Some people mistake kindness for habit. They treat your compromises as obligations. From now on, Elena Carter didn't play that game. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, the news rippled back. The court had acted with surprising speed. 3 Shaw family accounts were frozen. Ryan's new car, the one purchased with my dowry, was immobilized in the driveway. I heard later that when the enforcement officers arrived, Ryan had been outside wiping the hood with a chamois, humming to himself. The cloth dropped from his hand like a dead bird. That evening, I ate a bowl of noodles at a street-side diner and listened to old Frank, the Shaw's upstairs neighbor, narrate the carnage to a table of rapt listeners. You should have heard it. Patricia screamed at that boy for 3 solid hours, called him a useless worm who couldn't even control his own wife. Ryan blamed Derek for getting his car seized. The 2 of them nearly threw punches. Then Megan showed up to mediate, and within 3 sentences she was shrieking at the sister-in-law about who'd stolen more money from the family pot. Then what happened? Someone asked. Cops came. Neighbors called in a noise complaint. The police spent 2 hours talking them down. Old Frank took a long swallow of beer. Patricia hit Derek in the face with a slipper, yelling about how he should have sweet-talked Elena better. I finished my noodles, paid, and walked out into the cool night air. I sent Patricia a single text, "When does the money arrive?" 3 minutes later, my banking app lit up. $14,000 in return dowry, plus $5,600 from the savings division. Every cent. Derek called immediately. I answered. His voice was ragged with rage. Are you happy now? You've torn this family apart, are you happy? In the background, I could hear Patricia sobbing. Happy, I said, standing under a street lamp. You think I tore your family apart in 3 days? Your family spent 3 years grinding me into dust. I've barely gotten started. A long pause. Then his voice dropped into something almost plaintive. You used to be so sweet, Elena. You were so good. Yes, I was. I was so good that I let you drain everything out of me and still wondered what I was doing wrong. You never loved me. You loved having a punching bag who never hit back. I paused. But even a doormat eventually gets up and walks away. Control your mother. Keep your brother away from me. If I see any of you near my stall, I'll come after what's left. I hung up and blocked his number. Old Street's cobblestones gleamed under the street lamps. Storefronts were rolling down their metal shutters for the night. When I passed the hardware store on the corner, I glanced through the window. Lucas Grant was behind the counter, sorting a tray of screws. He looked up, and through the glass he gave me a single, unhurried nod. I nodded back and kept walking. My braised food stall debuted a week later, in the shabbiest corner of the night market. The setup was modest: a second-hand cooler, a stainless steel pot of bubbling brine, jars of spice, a folding table. The sign was handwritten in black marker on a piece of cardboard: Elena's Braised Specialties. It looked almost comically humble. But the brine was the product of a month's obsessive tinkering. Star anise, cassia, Sichuan peppercorn, black cardamom, cloves, ratios calibrated to the gram, timing precise to the minute. The pork hocks came out lacquered a deep mahogany, rich without being greasy. The chicken feet had skin that snapped taut and meat that slid off the bone. Business was slow at first. A few passers-by would stop, buy a half-pound of duck neck or a handful of wings, and usually admit it tasted good. But the location was terrible, and on a good night I barely broke even. What turned the stall into a phenomenon was a video. It was 10 o'clock on a Friday, the market's busiest hour. A young guy in a floral shirt lurched through the crowd, reeking of beer, and slammed his hand down on my table. Hey! You're Derek's ex, right? He squinted at me, swaying slightly. My buddy's life is in ruins because of you. His family's accounts are frozen. You're a cold woman, you know that. The vendors on either side of me shot nervous glances. A drunk looking for trouble was every stall owner's nightmare. I kept stirring the brine, not looking up. And that's your business how? It's my business because Derek's my brother. He smacked the table again. A bottle of chili oil toppled and shattered on the ground. I came to get justice for him. He reached to flip my folding table. But I had already bolted the legs to the lamppost with wire. The table didn't budge. In one motion I pulled my phone from my apron pocket and lifted the cleaver, the first use for chopping bones, holding it blade back outward like a barrier. Go ahead. Try. I pressed the live stream button and aimed the camera at his face. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a special episode of Elena's Braised Kitchen, live coverage of a drunkard sent by the Shaw family to trash my stall. The man froze. What are you doing? Filming you. Now, tell the audience who sent you. Was it Derek? How much did he pay? A crowd was already clotting around us. Nothing draws a night market audience like a live confrontation. I wasn't sent. I just think the man's bravado was evaporating fast. Your name is Terry Higgins. You live at 47 East Alley, you work as a loader at the building supply depot, and you went to elementary school with Derek. Last Friday at the Good Buddy barbecue, Derek bought you 3 skewers and 2 beers and you promised to rough me up. I recited it all in a flat, unhurried cadence. Old Street is small. Did you really think nobody would talk? Terry's face went white. He stammered something unintelligible, then turned and shoved his way into the crowd. The live stream, meanwhile, had jumped from 12 viewers to over 300. Comments scrolled furiously. Did he really send a drunk guy to smash her stall? This woman is my new hero. Drop the address, I'm coming with my girls tomorrow. That braised pork looks insane, OMG. I propped the phone on a tripod and gave the camera a grin. Sorry for the interruption, folks. Now back to our regular programming. Tonight's special, celebration braised platter, 20% off. The chat exploded. Celebration braised platter, I'm dead. Instant follow. Address. You are my internet spokesperson from now on. By closing time, I had made over $140. After I shut down the stream, a text appeared on my screen from Lucas. Saw the broadcast. Well played. I stared at those 7 words for a long moment, typed and deleted 3 different replies, and finally settled on, thanks. He responded immediately with an invitation, his hardware store, in an hour. Cold night. Hot tea. And let's talk about that brine recipe. Old Street was quiet when I pushed open the glass door, carrying a bag of leftover duck necks. Lucas had already brewed a pot of oolong. The shop was sparse and orderly, shelves of screws and hinges, a small desk behind the counter with a clay tea set. He leaned back in his chair, turning a plain porcelain cup between his fingers, as if he'd been turning over a thought of his own. You knew Derek would send someone to cause trouble, he said, skipping the pleasantries. Gathering intelligence is basic survival. I sat down across from him and opened the bag. After your text, I mapped out every one of Derek's contacts on Old Street. I knew who owed him favors and who was stupid enough to collect. I was just waiting for one of them to show up. Lucas picked up a duck neck, examined it, and took a bite. He chewed slowly, with the deliberation of someone used to assessing quality. Then he paused. This recipe. Proprietary blend. 8 spices, 6 hours of braising, 12 hours of soaking. I gave him the parameters without hesitation. Interested? He set down the bone. Not just interested. I want to partner with you. I'll provide the storefront, the business license, and startup capital. You bring the recipes and the technique. 50-50 split. 70-30. I didn't blink. In business, softness is just a faster way to go broke. Done. His answer came so fast I paused. He had clearly decided long before I walked in. You're not going to negotiate. You're worth it. He pushed a cup of tea toward me. I've lived on Old Street for years. I've never seen a woman hold a cleaver in one hand and live stream a drunk into retreat with the other. Maybe you haven't met enough women. Plenty. Just not many like you. The shop went quiet. Outside, a dog barked somewhere down the alley, and the distant clatter of the night market shutting down drifted through the walls. I took a sip of tea. The oolong hit my tongue with a dry edge and faded into a long, honeyed aftertaste. Then we have a deal. I stood, pushing the remaining duck necks toward him. I'll look at the space tomorrow. Tomorrow, he agreed. I walked out into the damp cobblestone street. At the corner, I glanced back. Lucas was still sitting by the window, his profile haloed in warm light, looking at something I couldn't see. My phone buzzed. Derek again, from a number I hadn't bothered to save. Elena, I know I messed up. I sent my mom back to the countryside. Ryan sold the car. Please, just give me one more chance. I stood under the street lamp and typed my reply, each word deliberate and final. Derek, every word you have ever spoken to me is a lie. I will never believe you again. Send. Block. The lamplight pooled honey gold on the cobblestones. Old Street lay quiet in the dark, like a book waiting to be read. I pulled up another number I had saved weeks ago and pressed dial. Hello. The voice on the other end was tired and wary. Is this 𝐒𝐓𝐿𝐴? My name is Elena Carter. I heard your ex-husband works in the same department as Derek Shaw. I was hoping we could talk. A long silence. Then a soft, humorless laugh. Elena Carter. I know who you are. The courthouse scene made the rounds. Come over. I've got a stack of hotel receipts, Derek's name all over them. I've been waiting a long time for someone brave enough to use them. Celia lived on the east side of town, in a tired brick apartment building where the stairwell lights had burned out 3 floors ago. She opened the door in faded sweatpants, her hair clipped back, her face carrying the kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with lack of sleep. The apartment was small but immaculate. A battered laptop sat open on the coffee table, surrounded by thick folders. Sit, she said, gesturing at the couch. You look younger than I expected. So do you. She handed me a glass of water and settled into the chair opposite. For a moment she just studied me, then her mouth quirked into a tired smile. You want to know why I agreed to talk to you? Because I watched that video of you at the courthouse 7 times. My ex works with Derek. Someone sent it to the department group chat the same night. Every time I watched it, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Satisfaction. And grief. Her story was longer and bloodier than mine. Married 8 years. Her husband had been cheating for 5. She hadn't known until the mistress showed up at her door. By then, he had siphoned away her savings, the money her parents had given them, even the college fund for their daughter. I wasn't as smart as you. I walked away with nothing. She traced the rim of her glass with a fingertip. He got the house, premarital asset. I lost custody. 2 lawsuits, both dismissed. Best lawyer money could buy. My money. The silence that followed was thick as wool. Headlights swept across the ceiling and vanished. So when you said you were going after Derek, I didn't hesitate. Not because I wanted to help you. Because I wanted to help the version of myself from 5 years ago. She pulled a sheaf of papers from a folder and spread them across the coffee table. Derek's infidelity isn't limited to one woman. Here. Hotel receipts. Photographs. A timeline so meticulously cross-referenced it looked like an auditor's report. 3. At least 3 that I can confirm. She tapped a photo of Derek in a car with a young woman making a peace sign. The shortest affair lasted a month. The longest is still ongoing. I stared at the evidence. I had known about one affair. The reality was a pit much deeper and filthier than I had imagined. Are these admissible? Every single one. Celia slid a printed spreadsheet toward me. I built a timeline linking every hotel stay, every bank transfer, every lie he told you about working late. I used to be a forensic accountant. This is what I do. I looked at the document, then at her. You did all this for a stranger. I did it for the woman I used to be. She leaned back. That woman doesn't get a rematch. But watching you land a clean hit, that proves something. That the bastards don't always win. We spent the afternoon organizing files. She taught me how to submit the evidence to multiple agencies, the court, Derek's HR department, the women's advocacy nonprofit, the community mediation board, so that no single office could bury it. Don't rely on one channel, she said, stapling a bundle of documents. Flood them from every direction. Then no one can pretend they didn't see. As I was leaving, she stopped me at the door. The hallway was dark. Elena. Yeah. Don't make the same mistake I did. Her voice came out of the blackness, thin and precise. In my final hearing, he got on his knees in the courtroom and begged me to drop the case, for the sake of our daughter. I did. The next day he sent our daughter to his parents' place in another state. I haven't seen her since. I stepped out into the evening cold. Behind me, Celia's window went dark. 3 days later, everything was in motion. The files had been delivered to 4 different offices. Celia had helped me draft a public statement, no emotional language, just a calm recitation of facts and a timeline. Facts are the sharpest blade, she had said. You don't need to twist it. Just hand it over. The wound will make itself. I sent the statement to several local media accounts. The effect was like dropping a match into dry grass. By evening, a women's advocacy account with 50,000 followers had shared the statement with a single line. This is the most meticulously documented divorce retaliation case I've ever seen. Take notes. Within hours, local news aggregators picked it up. A lawyer with a popular legal advice channel broke down the timeline on air and said, if even half of this holds up, she should sue for fraudulent transfer on top of everything else. By midnight, the post had been shared thousands of times. People began recognizing Derek's name. They found his former employer. Strangers began posting their own stories of financial abuse in the comments, and Elena's case became shorthand for fighting back. I didn't post any crying selfies. I didn't appear on camera. The evidence was the only weapon I deployed, and it cut deeper than any emotional plea ever could. The old street community rallied behind me. The women at the market chipped in to buy me a new sign, Elena's Braised Kitchen, tough enough to handle any jerk. The pancake vendor next to my stall started guarding the best spot for me every evening. Lucas hung a handwritten poster in his hardware store window, Elena's Braised Specialties, weekly Saturday pickup. Pre-order here. Why tough enough to handle any jerk? I asked him. He didn't look up from the box of bolts he was sorting. Because that's your brand. Women aren't just buying braised meat. They're buying the version of themselves that finally stood up. Package the attitude with the product and they'll clear your shelves. He was right. Women didn't just want good food. They wanted to taste courage. Sales quadrupled. I could barely keep up. And then Patricia counterattacked. I woke one morning to find my social media flooded. Patricia had published a long, tear-streaked post titled, "A Mother's Heartbreak, the Daughter-in-Law Who Destroyed Our Home." In it, I was a cold, scheming monster who had bled the Shaws dry, never lifted a finger, and had been cheating on Derek long before he ever looked elsewhere. She claimed I had stolen family money, that the dowry was a myth, that the entire courthouse scene had been a calculated performance. At the bottom of the post, she embedded an audio clip. It was her voice, weeping with the raw, unhinged anguish of a woman who has lost everything. "Elena, please come back. Take all the money, just don't do this to me." It was, without question, one of the finest theatrical performances I had ever heard. I was shaking with fury when I walked into the hardware store and played the clip for Lucas. He listened without expression. She's muddying the water. She doesn't need to prove anything. She just needs to make enough people doubt you so that you spend your energy defending yourself instead of attacking. Every minute you spend refuting her is a minute you aren't building your business." Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were documents I had never seen, a rental receipt for a commercial property Patricia had never declared. The original purchase agreement for Ryan's car, showing that the remaining balance had been paid from Patricia's private account, an account Derek had sworn didn't exist. Screenshots from the Shaw family group chat, where Patricia had written, in black and white, "Once the divorce is done, we'll find a way to get the apartment from her." I looked up at him. "How long have you had this?" "Since the day you told me she stole your dowry to buy that car." He shrugged. "Forensic accounting isn't just for professionals." That afternoon, I instructed my lawyer to file an additional suit for defamation. I didn't release a rebuttal statement. Instead, that night, I went live from my stall and simply played Patricia's weeping audio over the speakers while I calmly turned pork hocks in bubbling brine. The contrast, her hysterical sobs layered over the steady plop of braising liquid, went viral within the hour. The internet did the rest. Someone fact-checked every single claim in Patricia's post and created a rebuttal chart that was shared almost as widely as the original live stream. Within a weekend, the tide of public opinion had swung so decisively that Patricia deleted her accounts. On Monday, my lawyer called. The defamation suit has been accepted. Additionally, based on the evidence Mr. Grant provided, we can now file for fraudulent conveyance of marital assets. I strongly recommend pursuing it. I stood in the doorway of the shop, watching the morning light creep across Old Street's cobblestones. "File it," I said. "File everything." The legal battle stretched from October into March, spanning the whole of a bitter winter. On the day of the defamation hearing, the courthouse steps were crowded with supporters. Neighbors from Old Street, women who had traveled from other towns, a handful of reporters. Some held handmade signs, "Elena, we stand with you." Patricia walked into the courtroom looking like she had aged a decade. Her scarlet blouse had been replaced by a shapeless gray cardigan. Her hair was unwashed. When she saw the packed gallery, her step faltered, and Megan had to steady her. Derek sat in the defendant's chair and never once met my eyes. He had lost weight. His jaw was sharp, his eyes hollow. The exposure had cost him his job and the Shaw family its primary income. Ryan had been forced to sell the car. The family had turned inward, fangs bared at one another. Celia took the stand. For 40 minutes, she laid out the mutual alibi system Derek and her ex-husband had constructed, the fake business trips, the coordinated hotel bookings, the forged expense reports. Her delivery was clinical, almost dry, and utterly devastating. When she finished, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. Patricia broke down on the stand, wailing that she was just a mother who loved her son. No one was moved. The verdict came down on a day when the first green buds were appearing on Old Street sycamores. Defamation ruled in my favor. Patricia was ordered to issue a public apology and pay damages. The fraudulent conveyance ruling followed swiftly. The court recognized Derek's gross marital fault and awarded me 70% of the joint assets. Ryan's car was classified as a recipient of illegally transferred funds and liquidated. My studio apartment, which had never been legally encumbered, was confirmed as my sole property. The judgment ran 47 pages. I photographed everyone. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt sunlight on my face for the first time in months. Spring air, thick with the scent of damp earth and braising spices, drifted in from the direction of Old Street. Derek caught up with me on the steps. "Elena." His voice was raw. He looked even more diminished than before, suit wrinkled, tie askew, eyes red-rimmed. I have nothing left. My job, my money, my reputation, my mom's in the hospital. My brother won't speak to me. Megan said she's done with the family. He looked up at me, and to my astonishment, his eyes brimmed with tears. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please, can we just... Derek. I spoke softly, so softly he had to lean in. Let me ask you something. If I had never found your hotel receipts, never fought back, never sued, would you be standing here telling me you were wrong? His lips moved. Nothing came out. You would still be spending my money. You would still be sleeping with other women. And when I got sick, you would have thrown me out just the same. I took a step back. You don't regret hurting me. You regret getting caught. And I don't care about your regret. I only care about my own road forward. Elena. I didn't look back. The sound of a choked sob followed me down the steps, but it grew fainter with every stride. The sycamores were leafing out. Somewhere down the street, a delivery truck rumbled toward the market. My phone buzzed. A photo from Celia, her in a break room with new co-workers, holding up a permanent employee badge. The caption, "Made it." I sent back a thumbs up and turned onto Old Street. The hardware store window had a new poster, Elena's Braised Kitchen, Spring Menu, Sichuan Peppercorn Chicken. Now available. Lucas was behind the counter. When I walked in, he put down his ledger. You won. 47 pages. I laid the judgment on the counter. He flipped through the first few pages and the corner of his mouth lifted. Dinner to celebrate. I know a place. You made a reservation. That's unlike you. A friend just opened a private kitchen at the end of the street. Claudia. You'll like her. He stood and pulled a set of keys from a drawer. Also, I wanted to show you something. He set the keys on the counter. The shop next door. The stationery lease expired. If we knock through the wall, you double your space. Rent stays the same as what you're paying now. I stared at the keys, then at him. Lucas, why are you doing all this? Really? He was quiet for a moment. The evening light slanted through the front window, gilding the shelves of screws and nails. Do you remember, about 4 years ago, a gas station on the south side of town? There was a man slumped against the wall outside the convenience store, gray-faced and sweating. You bought him a soda and a sandwich and sat with him until he could stand. The memory surfaced like a stone dropped into still water. That was you. I had just lost my business. My partner had cleaned out the accounts. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I was sitting there waiting to die, and then a stranger stopped and asked if I was okay. He met my eyes. You handed me a sandwich and said, "Take your time." Then you walked away. For you, it was 5 minutes. For me, it was the reason I kept breathing. He tucked his hands into his jacket pockets. I rebuilt everything from scratch. Opened this shop. Paid off my debts. I always hoped I'd get the chance to repay you. When I saw you in that courthouse, tearing up the divorce agreement, I recognized you instantly. All the coincidences, the text, the partnership, the perfectly timed evidence, had never been coincidences at all. So this, I said, picking up the keys, what is it? Consider it back rent, he said. You saved my life. You owe me nothing. But if you want, you can let me help. It's been a long time, and I've gotten very patient. I turned the keys over in my palm. Outside, the street lamps were flickering on. Somewhere in the night market, a vendor's walk clanged, and the smell of chili and cumin drifted through the open door. "Fine," I said. "I'll take the space." We walked together toward the private kitchen at the end of the block. Halfway there, my phone buzzed with a message from Mrs. Bennet. "Elena, your mother is here. She's at my apartment. She says she won't leave until she sees you." I stopped walking. "Bad news?" Lucas asked. "My mother. She came looking for me." I hadn't spoken to my parents since the divorce. They were good, soft-hearted people who had spent their lives terrified of what the neighbors might say. I knew from experience that if I let them back in too soon, they would fill my ears with pleas to reconcile, to forgive, to be the bigger person. I wasn't ready for that fight. But I also remembered, with a pang I couldn't fully suppress, the way my mother used to get up at dawn to make me dumplings before a long trip. "Do you want to see her?" Lucas asked. I looked up at the darkening sky and thought about Celia, about the daughter she hadn't seen in years, about all the things that can never be unsaid. "First, dinner," I said. "Then, maybe." Claudia's private kitchen was small and warm, with only 3 tables and a chalkboard menu featuring 6 dishes. She brought out a steaming pot of fish braised with Sichuan peppercorns, the numbing fragrance curling into the air like incense. I had just taken the first bite, tender, floral, electric, when my phone buzzed again. "Mrs. Bennet." This time I answered. "Elena, your mother has been crying on my sofa for 2 hours. She won't eat. She just keeps saying she wants to apologize." Mrs. Bennet's voice was gentle but firm. "I know you have every right to turn her away. But she looks broken, honey. She said she saw the video of that woman screaming at you, and she hasn't slept since." I closed my eyes. "Put her on." A shuffle, a muffled sob, and then my mother's voice, cracked and small. "Elena, is it really you?" Hearing it was like a needle sliding under my rib. "I'm at the end of Old Street. The restaurant with the blue door. Come. Just you and Dad." She arrived 10 minutes later, my father trailing behind her like a shadow. My mother had lost weight. Her hair was more salt than pepper now. She carried a cloth bag in both arms, holding it against her chest as if it might shield her. I stood up. She stopped 3 feet away, her mouth trembling. "Elena." She tried to smile and failed. "I read everything. All the articles. That audio, the one where that woman screamed at you, I listened to it all night. Your father did too." She held out the bag. Inside were containers of homemade dumplings, the pleats slightly squashed from the journey. "Pork and shepherd's purse. Your favorite. I made them this morning." I didn't move. My mother's hands were shaking. I spent my whole life worrying about what people would think. I was so scared of gossip that I couldn't see what was happening to my own daughter. "When you called me, years ago, and tried to tell me how they treated you, I told you to try harder. I told you a good wife doesn't complain." Tears spilled over her cheeks. "I was wrong. I was so wrong, and I am so sorry." She set the dumplings on the table, then reached into her purse and pulled out a bank book. "This is every penny your father and I have saved. It's not much, about $7,000, but it's yours. Use it for your shop. We don't want anything back." My father, still standing by the door, finally spoke, his voice thick. "We should have protected you. We didn't. We failed you, and we know we can't make up for it. But we're here now. If you'll let us be. I looked at the dumplings, at the bank book, at the two people who had raised me to be kind, and then watched the world punish me for it. They had been weak. So had I. We had all been learning the same brutal lesson in different ways. I picked up a dumpling and bit into it. The familiar taste flooded my mouth, and something tight in my chest cracked open. "When my shop opens," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "you should come. I'll save you a table." My mother broke into a weeping, crumpled smile. My father turned away and pressed his fist to his mouth. Later, after they had left, Lucas walked me back to the hardware store. The street was quiet, the cobblestones slick with early spring damp. "You did a brave thing tonight," he said. I ate a dumpling. "You let them back in. That's harder." He paused. "For what it's worth, I think the shop is going to do very well." I looked at him under the street lamp. 70-30 still stands. "Elena." He gave a small, rare smile. "When I make a deal, I keep it." The grand opening of Elena's braised kitchen fell on the first truly warm Saturday of spring. The newly expanded space, the hardware store's old neighbor, now connected by a wide archway, gleamed with fresh white tile and warm wood counters. Outside, a hand-painted sign hung from the awning, "Elena's, Old Street Braised Specialties." Flowers crowded the entrance, bouquets from old street neighbors, arrangements from customers who had followed the saga online, even a potted orchid from someone in Seattle with a note that read, "For every woman who didn't get her day in court, thrive." Celia arrived carrying a comically large ceramic lucky cat, which she positioned, repositioned, and repositioned again until she declared it not crooked anymore. She wore a new linen blazer and had color in her cheeks. Her custody battle had been reopened. Her daughter had called her last week for the first time in 2 years. She didn't gloat. She just said, quietly, "This time I'm not backing down." My parents came at noon. They stood at the edge of the crowd, looking as nervous as if they were entering a stranger's home. I seated them at the best table by the window and brought out a platter of everything: braised pork hock, Sichuan peppercorn chicken, and a small bowl of pork and shepherd's purse dumplings that I had made myself. My father cleaned his plate, set down his chopsticks, and said, "Yours are better than your mother's." My mother shot him a look, then turned away to dab at her eyes. At 2 o'clock we cut the ribbon. Lucas had wrapped a pair of scissors from the hardware store in red paper. When the ribbon split, the crowd applauded, and Mrs. Bennet, filming on her phone, shouted, "Old Street finally has its own lady boss." The wooden sign above the door had been carved from reclaimed elms salvaged from a demolished building on the street. Lucas had commissioned it. "Elm doesn't rot," he said, standing beside me as we looked up at it. "And in the spring, when it rains, it releases a scent, faint, a little sweet. This street used to smell like elm. Now only your shop does." The scent of braising spices drifted out the open door, mixing with the faint perfume of old wood. The line of customers stretched past the corner. I stood behind the counter, ladle in hand, watching the faces press forward: neighbors, strangers, women who had driven hours to eat food made by a woman who had refused to stay on the floor. Lucas leaned against the archway, arms crossed, watching the crowd with an expression that might, if you looked closely, have been pride. "You know," he said, "when I watched you walk out of that courthouse, I thought you were the most terrifying person I'd ever seen." Past tense. Present tense, he said. "But you're also the most alive. It's a good combination." I laughed, and the sound surprised me. A full, unguarded laugh that tasted like something I hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe. Or just the simple, radical act of being okay. Outside, the sycamores swayed in the spring breeze. The ceramic cat on the counter waved its paw, steady and tireless, a metronome of small blessings. The line moved forward, and I bent to my work, weighing out spice, wrapping warm parcels in paper, making change, saying thank you. At the back of the shop, mounted on the wall near the kitchen, hung a single-framed photograph of old street taken decades ago, the storefronts younger, the trees smaller. Someone, Lucas, I knew, because I recognized the careful, upright slant of his handwriting, had penciled a note along the bottom margin. The story starts again here.